So we do these webinars every single month on just all kinds of wellness topics. So if you ever have a burning wellness topic that you would like to know more about, please put it in the chat or email me personally. I'm always looking for what our community is interested in. So they're always a little bit different. I do a lot of repeated topics, but I'm constantly changing it up with what I continue learning as well as I practice wellness here at the Wellness Center. If you've not been here, our center is actually in Brea. But we do a lot of things online as well. So today we are talking about blood sugar and insulin resistance. The reason I chose this topic is November is Diabetes Awareness Month. I actually think today is specifically Diabetes Awareness Day. My sister has type 1 diabetes and she texted me to give someone with diabetes a hug today. So it's time to recognize not just diabetes, but the underlying issues going on there. So today we're not really talking about diabetes specifically. We're talking about blood sugar and insulin resistance, which can impact you whether or not you have a diagnosis of diabetes or a diagnosis of pre-diabetes. These things can be going on under the surface, having imbalances in both blood sugar and insulin, and they can become a problem down the line if we're not taking care of them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to do a quick recap because if you have not learned with me, or even if you had, it's very good to relearn things about the basics of carbohydrates and blood sugar before I start talking to you about why that's important and how that impacts our long-term health and metabolic health and what's going on with those things. If you're not understanding what I'm talking about when I say carbs and starches and blood sugar in general, it's going to be hard to follow along. So we're going to take just 2 slides here to do a quick review of what types of foods increase our blood sugar. I'm not talking about which ones increase them more than others, or if that's a bad thing or a good thing. Just when you eat a food, does it increase your blood sugar? And that is the category of carbohydrates, starches. So there are 3 main areas of carbohydrates. The first picture you see here that is all of the breads and rices and things, that's what we call starches. So that's where it's rice, pasta, any type of grain or something made from a grain. So that could be breads, that could be tortillas, crackers, cereal. Also starchy vegetables. So potatoes you see there, corn, peas, legumes, meaning lentils and beans. These are all carbohydrates. So yes, they all kind of do different things. Yes, some have protein, some don't. Yes, we can talk about which ones are whole grain versus not whole grain. But when we're talking about do they increase your blood sugar, none of that matters. Okay, when we're talking about how much they increase your blood sugar, it matters. But right now we're just saying, what is a carbohydrate? Carbohydrates increase our blood sugar. That means all things starches. Fruit, all fruit, from bananas to papayas to blueberries to kiwis, they are all carbohydrates. They all increase our blood sugar. And then, of course, our category of desserts and sweets and treats. All of these are going to increase our blood sugar as well, whether it is a chocolate chip cookie or a Rice Krispie treat or our Christmas dessert platter or chocolate pudding. All of them will also increase our blood sugar. So I think that's really important to know of this category of carbohydrates versus other categories like protein when it comes to our meats and eggs, when it comes to different types of fats like avocados and olives. These aren't going to really move the needle much on our blood sugar. They can in some instances and maybe a tiny bit, but not noticeably. So we're talking about carbohydrates today. Now, how does that happen? We eat the carbohydrate food, whether that's the banana or the bread or the cookie, and that will turn into small molecules called glucose. And this is where, yes, it does matter, a blueberry versus a banana versus whole grain bread versus white bread. They may turn into a smaller or a greater amount of glucose molecules. But if it's a carbohydrate, glucose molecules will be created, and those will go into the bloodstream. And the body will recognize, oh, there's glucose here. There's blood sugar here. My blood sugar is going up. Okay, so now moving over to the right-hand side of this slide, the diagram here, we either have low blood sugar or high blood sugar. And to picture this, do you remember those kids' toys that were those long, like glitter sticks? And you would move them this way and all the glitter would fall down, and you'd move it this way and all the glitter would fall down. Pretend that that's your bloodstream. And all those little glitters are sugars, are glucose molecules. So that if you packed that up with a ton of glitter, that would move a lot more slowly, right? Versus if there were only a few things of glitter, it's going to move really quickly. So our body can recognize when there's high versus low sugar, and it knows what to do. High levels of sugar, as we're going to see today, are not good for the body. So the body says, hey, pancreas, release some insulin so that our cells can take up some of this blood sugar, this glucose, and it's not floating around in the blood anymore. So insulin gets released. Insulin is a hormone. Insulin goes knocking on the door of our cells and says, please take some of this glucose out of the blood and use it in a variety of ways. And then we go back to normal in our blood sugar level in our blood. And the opposite can happen too. If we're too low, there's a different hormone that's released called glucagon, and it pushes more sugar out. So our body's always trying to balance itself out when it comes to blood sugar. Okay, so now, why does that matter? Who cares? So I'm showing you on this graph on the right, different levels of blood sugar. The one on the top that's a red line is what's considered normal levels for someone with diabetes. The one on the bottom, the black line, is what's considered normal levels for someone without diabetes. Okay. So throughout the day, we're going to go up and down, depending on what we're eating, how we're sleeping, how stressed we're, how we're moving. You'll never see a flat line of blood sugar. It's always going to be going like this as the body tries to balance it out. What we want to do is try and keep within those normal ranges. The problem is that a majority of people, research has shown that actually over 80% of people are often spiking up to the 180 number multiple times throughout the day. So if you put your finger on that chart and find 180 on the vertical line and move across, you'll see that's a diabetes range. If you're popping into 180 on a regular basis throughout your day, you're popping into diabetes range throughout the day, whether or not you have diabetes. So again, this might not mean you have diabetes, but if you're constantly popping into those higher levels, that's a problem. And I'm going to show you why and what's happening there when we're constantly popping up. So more than 80% of the population, multiple times throughout the day, is popping into 180. Also, majority of the population is often spending at least 30 minutes there. So we're not having a banana, we're spiking up to 180 and we're quickly coming back down where, our body normalizes. A lot of us are spiking and hanging out at that high diabetes range, and then we come back down. And so again, these are issues. What happens is we end up having these symptoms listed here on the left. We have a lack of satiety. We have cravings. We have hormone imbalance. Inflammation is going on. We gain weight. We lose focus. We have mood and energy swings. We're unable to sleep. There's skin issues and even immunity stuff going on. So yes, your blood sugar very much matters, even if you don't have diabetes. So hopefully that is becoming clear. And I love this quote. You've heard it from me before if you've come to any class before with me, but the absence of disease does not guarantee the presence of health. So just because you don't have diabetes or pre-diabetes does not mean that you're not spiking up into those ranges throughout the day enough times to be creating some damage. Okay, so we need to be worried about this even if there is no diagnosis on board. So here's some more stats for you. 1 billion people worldwide have diabetes or prediabetes. 1 billion! And 8.5 million go undiagnosed, estimated each year. Okay, because they're just not going into the doctor, they're not checking things, maybe they're right on the borderline. 80% of the population has daily glucose spikes outside of healthy range. We just talked about that. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, so the FAO, most people know that as, has called for a global emphasis on reducing sugar intake because of the rise of non-communicable diseases, which is known as diabetes, hypertension, your metabolic conditions that are not, that are not contagious. It's become such a problem worldwide, and it's so well known that it's related to our sugar intake that the FAO is saying this needs to be priority number one. Studies show increased risk of metabolic diseases and death with spikes in blood sugar levels, even within normal ranges for those with diabetes. Within normal ranges for diabetes, and even in those with no diabetes at all. So basically, independent of your diabetes diagnosis, if your blood sugars are spiking out of normal, the more that happens, the more your risk of metabolic diseases and death increases. They're correlated. Variability in glucose spikes leads to greater concern than slightly elevated consistent levels. So what this means is maybe you have a baseline that's slightly higher, but your day is just barely kind of going up and down, up and down, up and down, but you're staying consistent. That's better for you than having a non-diabetic baseline, but constantly all day spiking up to that 180, 200 range and spiking back down, because it's that huge variation in spikes that is the problem. Okay. So why is it so bad for us? Because ultimately, isn't sugar energy? Aren't carbohydrates energy? Don't we need glucose? And the answer is yes, we do need glucose. We do need glucose molecules to create energy to make everything work in our body, from making new cells on our skin to making our eyes work. Our body uses glucose. Glucose is very important. But I heard a really cool analogy about 2 months ago, and I really liked it. So I wanted to share that, of thinking of a plant. A plant needs water, right? And if anybody here is a gardener, if you've ever watered your plant a little too much, it's actually not good, right? An overwatered plant is usually a sick or sometimes a dead plant. It's the same thing with us with glucose. Yes, we need it. We need it for survival, but too much, and it's overwhelming. We overwhelm our cells and we can drown. We essentially drown our mitochondria, which is the powerhouse, the energy maker inside each cell. We drown it in glucose. And when we have drowned mitochondria, they just get tired. They can't keep up because they're dealing with all this sugar and glucose going on. So they get tired. When you have tired mitochondria, guess how you feel? Tired. You get that chronic fatigue. Everything feels like it's harder. It's harder to get out of bed. Sometimes it's like, I just don't want to go do that thing. Foggy mind is another one. And then ironically, sometimes it's hard to sleep because we're overtired. If you've ever any of you have had infants before, you know that when they go past that napping range, suddenly they're overtired and they can't nap anymore. That's what happens. And so it's just this chronic cycle. So mitochondria are little powerhouses, and they can only use so much glucose. When we're overdoing it, we're overspiking it, we're overwatering our plants. Another thing that happens when we're getting those constant spikes is that we have something called oxidation. Oxidation is essentially our aging process. It's what turns fruit bad once you cut it open. When you have any type of sugar or glucose that's exposed to air or heat or light, they start to get icky, right? They turn brown. Same thing with cooking. When you put a creme brulee in the oven, the sugars on top start to brown. All sugars and types of glucose do this when they're exposed to heat, light, and air. It's this oxidation process. So when we have excessive spikes in sugar and our mitochondria can't handle it, now we have aging cells. We have cells that are oxidizing. They're getting kind of old and icky, and they just don't work as well because they're overwhelmed and they're just gunked up with sugar. They're like a creme brulee. They're all sticky. So essentially, we're aging ourselves. And then the other thing that happens is we have insulin release. We talked about this, that our body knows that this mitochondrial fatigue and oxidation is happening when we have those glucose spikes. And so our body says, get out of the blood, go into the cells, go somewhere else, because I don't want this happening. So it says, insulin, go do that. Go tell the cells to open their doors. Insulin is the key, and it lets the blood sugar in. It's what's supposed to happen. But when it's happening over and over and over again, and we're releasing tons of insulin because we're eating tons of glucose, now our cells start not recognizing the insulin as much. Or the insulin can't even quite get to the cell because now it's surrounded by a layer of fat. So we get what's called insulin resistance. So again, you might not have diabetes, but you might have insulin resistance going on where the cells are like, yeah, insulin, you've been here before. I don't want to open my door anymore, or the door's a little bit stuck and the lock's just not working. And all of a sudden now the cells can't take up the sugar. They're full. So now the sugar's hanging out, but we also still have insulin hanging out. So now we have both. And you just have this whole cascade of a problem with insulin resistance. The other issue with insulin resistance is insulin is what we call anabolic. So it's a storage hormone. It puts things away. It doesn't let us burn. So we've created all of these fat cells because we have all this sugar that doesn't know where to go, and it turns into fat cells. And now we can't burn that fat because we have insulin hanging out. And so as long as insulin is there, we can't burn the fat off. So again, we're kind of stuck in this cycle of now we have excess fat on board and overweight, and we can't lose it because we can't burn it. All of these are happening because we're having those constant spikes in sugar. It's a lot of science. Hopefully that made sense. I actually will take a quick pause if there's any question on any of that. You can type it into the chat. I'm going to wait a minute. I always hesitate before I throw all of that at you in the beginning of a class, but I think it's really important to kind of understand what's going on underneath so that now we can talk about how to change it. No questions yet. Okie dokie. All right, we'll move on. If you have a question, put it in. Get my arrow back. Okay. So again, how do you know if you have insulin resistance even? Because if you don't have diabetes and your doctor's not worried about that, they might not be testing your insulin levels. So how would you ever know if they're high? These are some physical symptoms that you probably have insulin resistance going on. If you're overweight and long-term overweight, especially if within that overweight you have excess visceral fat. That's the key. If you're overweight, but you actually have a lot of muscle and not a lot of visceral fat on board, I'm not actually all that worried. But if you have overweight and lots of visceral fat, and that's that kind of belly, that beer belly, then that's the problem. Then you probably have insulin resistance. And if you're really wondering about that, you can get a body composition assessment. Lots of gyms have them now. We have one here at the Wellness Center. If you wanted, they're really easy. You just hop on and it does a scan and it gives you a printout of what your body is made of, not just how much weight, but what's visceral, what's skeletal muscle, so on and so forth. Another way to know if you have insulin resistance going on is you probably have tried to lose weight and haven't been able to, despite following all the guidelines. You might have a lot of excess thirst. You might feel like you're constantly hungry or constantly craving, and then you eat that thing you were craving and you're still craving that thing. Chronic fatigue we talked about. Acne and skin tags, weird discolorations, especially in the neck and in the armpits. That's usually conglomerations of sugar. Blurry vision, tingling in hands and feet. Now, if you're having these symptoms, you're probably pretty far along. You likely do have at least pre-diabetes, but again, maybe you haven't been tested for it. High blood pressure and high triglycerides, almost always best friends with insulin resistance. Hormone imbalance, especially things like PCOS. If you have PCOS, I can pretty much guarantee you have insulin resistance. Obviously with diabetes, and then also if you have a risk of other cardiovascular events, if you've had a stroke in the past or a heart condition, you are at higher likelihood of having insulin resistance. So what do we do about this? Let's get away from the negative stuff. Now we know that this is important. And what are we going to do? How can we prevent this from happening or make it better, especially if we think like, oh, I probably do have some insulin resistance going on? Here are 8 different things, and we're going to go through each of them to have better blood sugar management, which will turn into insulin sensitivity. That's what we want, not insulin resistance. We want our cells nice and sensitive to insulin. We want to eat more fiber. We want to partner our carbs. We want to minimize added sugar and hydrate and move and build muscle specifically. We want to monitor our stress and our sleep, and we want to honestly be tracking and knowing what numbers we have. So let's go through each of those things. And these little pictures here, those are blood sugar monitors if you've never seen them before. So let's start with fiber. Fiber Yes, comes from carbs. So I am telling you to eat carbohydrates. I'm not telling you to take them away, but I want you to eat certain types of carbohydrates. The ones that are really chewy and really crunchy, that maybe have a skin on them, that come from a real food and are not super highly processed into something we no longer recognize. Those are the high fiber ones. High fiber intake is a minimum of 25 to 30 grams per day, which is about 5 cups of vegetables, give or take. And of course, fruit does have fiber in it. Whole grains do have fiber in them. Your best source of fiber is going to be your vegetables, but yes, you can certainly include things like whole grain bread or wild rice in that 25 to 30 grams per day minimum, and that is a minimum. Most traditional food cultures, like that live in places like the blue zones and that have not had westernized diets yet, typically eat closer to 40 grams per day. So if the more the merrier when it comes to fiber. Most Americans are eating closer to 14. So we're not even half really of what we should be getting and nowhere close to what traditional cultures eat. Why? Fiber is a really cool type of substance that essentially lines your gut with all this mesh so that the blood's whatever carbohydrates you're eating are not being absorbed very quickly. They're sort of slowly releasing those glucose molecules into your system. So instead of getting spiked to 180, you're sort of having this sort of curved mountain, maybe up to like 115, and then you kind of come back down again because the fiber hasn't let it all just come in all at once. This is the difference between an orange and orange juice. Okay, you're getting fiber in the orange, you're getting no fiber in the juice, you're only getting the glucose. Okay, that's the difference between white bread and a whole grain bread. So when you're reading labels, read them for at least 3 grams, if not more, of fiber per serving. That's always what you're looking for. Or buy fibrous foods and carbohydrates that don't have a label, like fruits and vegetables, and then you know it's really high in fiber. Okay, so here's your hot tip when it comes to fiber intake. Eat a salad or a crudité plate, so literally just like raw vegetables, like some little raw carrots and bell peppers and celery, before a meal or even while you're prepping. I know I get really hungry while I'm making dinner because I get home a little bit late. My kids are like, when are we eating? And so I usually have a little plate on the counter of cucumbers and bell peppers or whatever vegetables I happen to have around. And I'm munching on those and they're munching on those while I'm prepping dinner. And what we're doing is we're creating a fibrous mesh in our gut to help with whatever we end up eating after that. So that's just an easy way to manage your blood sugar, even if the meal doesn't change at all. It's white pasta with tomato sauce and bread, like carby city. You're still going to get a spike, but you're going to get less of one if you have a big salad beforehand. And when I say salad, I mean all the crunchy vegetables. I don't just mean romaine lettuce and a sweet dressing. Okay, I really do mean more of the vegetables, maybe olive oil type of thing with that. Okay, the next thing we want to do is partner our carbs. When we have carbs by themselves, even if they are a fibrous carb, and even if it's a whole fruit like an apple, it's still mostly glucose. And it's not and usually quite enough fiber to create a mesh. And so a really good practice to get into is to always partner your carbs with either protein or fat, because they also slow down the absorption of that sugar. So if you take bread versus bread with avocado mashed on top of it, you're going to see a much different glucose spike with the bread with avocado. You're going to see it more of that slow curve and less of that spike. And remember, it's the spikes that's the problem. So anytime you have a carbohydrate, remember what those are: fruit, sweets, starchy vegetables, any type of grain or legume. Anytime you have any of those carbohydrates, also have it with protein or fat. So here are just some examples. If you're having an apple, have your apple with cheese. We talked about the toast with avocado. Bonus points if you're having vegetables on top of that avocado. Banana with peanut butter. Smoothies, make sure there's a protein powder and maybe avocado in there or seeds. If you're having a rice bowl, make sure that there's some sort of maybe chicken and avocado in there and lots of vegetables. So always partnering those carbohydrates. And your hot tip is start just practicing noticing. Look at what you're about to eat. Snack, breakfast, lunch, I don't care. What are you about to eat? Where is the carbohydrate? And is there a protein or a fat with it? And do they kind of look like they're in about the same portion size, more or less? Or is it like 2 bites of chicken and 3 cups of rice? That's not partnering your carbs. Okay, so just start noticing, identify, so that you're getting used to seeing that on your plate, and over time that will also force you to change your habit and add something else. All right, next thing is minimizing our added sugar. The recommendations for the United States are no more than 6 to 9 teaspoons of added sugar per day maximum. So you don't actually have to get that at all. You could have 0. But maximum 6 to 9 teaspoons a day. The 6 is for ladies, the 9 is for men. 6 teaspoons is 24 grams. So I always put that because when we're looking at labels, it looks like grams. So what does that mean? You can divide by 4. So on your little Yoplait yogurt here picture, it says 16 grams of added sugar. Divide that by 4, which is like 3.5. That means it's 3.5 teaspoons in that container. Okay, so 6 to 9 teaspoons or 24 to 36 grams per day maximum. Kids get 4 teaspoons per day, so they don't get more than us. Those of you with kiddos running around, and babies and toddlers up to 2 years old, 0. So read your labels. Less than 7 grams of sugar per serving. If it doesn't give you that added line, then go for less than 7. If it does give you the added sugar line, then you want that to be less than 4. Okay, and the first 3 ingredients should not be sugar or any type of sugar. Those are just words to live by on label reading. So let's take our yogurt here. 16 grams of added sugar. We divide that by 4. We've got 3.5 teaspoons of added sugar. Ladies, that's more than half of your daily allotment in that tiny little container. And if you add granola or had a frappuccino with it or a bagel, boom, there's your added sugar. Kids, that's pretty much all they get in that tiny little thing. So could we, as a thought experiment, could you buy a plain, no added sugar yogurt and add 1 teaspoon of honey to it? I bet it would be delicious and probably just enough sweetness, and maybe you add some fruit and some nuts to it, and you've just cut the added sugar down by 2/3. So a really good practice, your hot tip, is to buy unsweetened things and sweeten them yourself. No one's telling you have to eat everything plain and never sweeten anything, but you be in charge of how much sugar you're eating. Don't let the company be in charge of how much sugar you're eating. Okay, and then you can choose a better sweetener too. We can talk about raw honey or allulose or monk fruit and things that are even better for us. And also, I guarantee you, if you start eating less sweet foods, you suddenly start craving less sweet foods. Okay, hydrate. One of the very first symptoms of dehydration is a craving for sugar. So our bodies, it's that same feeling, it's that same craving feeling in our systems. I'm seeing somebody drink water right now. That's good. Also, guess what? Our cells are nice and plump. When they get dehydrated, they shrivel up like little raisins and they cannot function and bring that sugar in very well. So we literally can't use those mitochondria when we are dehydrated. So it's really, really important to that whole system that we are hydrated. So you need half of your body weight in water every single day. So do that math real quick. How much do you weigh? Divide it in half. That's how much you need in ounces, not in cups. The other thing, and this is just your hot tip on this one, is to also think about electrolytes. If you are someone who drinks a lot of water, but you're also peeing all the time, like you drink a cup of water and you got to pee 15 minutes later and that happens all day long, you're probably not using that water very well. If it's just going through your system, you probably are low in your electrolytes. So a great way to make sure that you have enough electrolytes is in 1 or 2 of your glasses of water every day, half a teaspoon of sea salt and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. There is your nature's Gatorade right there. That will give you all the good electrolytes to make sure you're using that water. Another great one is coconut water, but coconut water does also have a sugar in it, like a natural sugar. So you don't want to be downing coconut water all day, but 4 to 8 ounces in a day would also be okay. Moving and building. So moving away from the food, let's talk about moving. If we are not moving our bodies and we're eating carbohydrates and our blood sugar is spiking, we're not using that sugar. So that sugar that's going into the cells isn't being used for energy. And if it's not being used for energy, guess what it's going to do? It's going to turn into fat cells. And we're just going to kind of sit and create more fat cells. So glucose goes into three different areas: your liver, your muscle, and then a fat cell when the liver and the muscle are full. Okay, when there's nowhere to go there. So the muscle is the perfect place to direct that glucose. The muscle is what's called the glucose sink, because the muscle will just eat it up. Your muscles love glucose and they can use it really, really well. But you can only do that if you have a lot of muscle. If you don't have a lot of muscle on board, there's nowhere for that glucose to go. It's going to go to a fat cell. Okay, so we really want to emphasize muscle strengthening by doing resistance training. And resistance training can mean that you're doing weightlifting. It can mean push-ups, anything where you're straining the muscle 2 to 3 days per week minimum. You can actually do most days of the week resistance training depending on how heavy you're lifting. If you're not a real heavy lifter, you can do a lot more days per week. So work with a personal trainer to find the right type of resistance training for you and your body, because you also don't want to injure yourself. But a lot of people think that they're doing weightlifting and exercise and they're not really building any muscle. They're just doing a few weights here and there. I not to throw my mother-in-law under the bus, but she likes to walk around with her 2-pound weights all day long. She's not really doing anything with those. So work with an expert, and also know that you do need that in addition to cardio. Cardio is not going to create the muscle where your glucose can go. It's a good way to burn off energy, but you're probably not going to burn off all of the carbs that you just ate this morning in your 20-minute walk, 30-minute walk. Okay, so we do need some cardio, and zone 2 is your going for a walk movement. You can still talk and have a conversation, but your heart rate's going up a little bit. That's your 30 minutes per day. High intensity is where you're having trouble having a conversation. That's like 10 minutes a week. You don't need that high intensity sprinting very often, although it does help you with how you use your blood sugars on board. Okay, so the lesson here is the more muscle, the better. And truly, those who have more muscle on board see less spikes in their blood sugar. So if I have less muscle than my husband and we both eat the same cookie, I will probably have a bigger spike than he will because he has more muscle on board. Okay, so muscles are super, super important. Also, because of this, it's the best time to eat a lot of carbs is pre and post exercise when your muscles are truly working. So if you're just jonesing for that cookie and you know you're going to be going to the gym to do some resistance training, have that cookie a half an hour before you go. You're going to use it better and have less of a spike than if you did it later in the day. So those are just some things. So some tips: don't sit down for 15 to 30 minutes after you eat. Research upon research, study after study shows that if you just stay moving, you don't have to go for a fast walk, just move your body for at least 15 minutes after eating a meal, the blood glucose goes from a spike to much more of a dip, independent of the type of food that you ate. And if you're anyone who's ever done monitoring, I used to wear a blood glucose monitor just to see what happened. I had this big bowl of pasta one night, just white pasta with tomato sauce. I didn't partner it with my carbs. I didn't have a salad beforehand. My blood sugar starts to spike. I did a 15-minute walk with my kids around the block. And we're talking, they're 3 and 5, so we weren't going fast. My blood sugar was right back down to normal by the time I got back 15 minutes later. So it's really, really powerful. Stay up and do your chores, do your dishes. Just don't sit down. And any sugary carbs that you have, if you can have them right before or right after doing weightlifting, even better for your blood sugar. Okay, so stress and blood sugar. This is another thing that you have control over, is how stressed we are when we eat. So many, many studies have shown that when we are in stress mode, or AKA fight or flight, while we eat, this can significantly impact our blood sugar over time. So this little chart here on the right that I have for you, when we're in fight or flight mode, when our heart rate's going up, when we're stressed out, and you might not be truly feeling stressed out, but let's say you're stuck in traffic or you just had a hard conversation, or maybe you're watching the news and you don't like what you see. And you're in fight or flight while you eat, your breathing rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, heart rate, blood sugar, insulin all go up together. So now we know what happens, right? Is we're having oxidation and inflammation going on. We have an aging process that's happening, and our creativity and concentration and thought processes go down. So if I am also having a craving at that moment when I'm stressed, if I'm stressed out, I'm going to just reach for that cookie and not think twice about it because I don't have that boundary in my mental faculties. Okay. Versus when we're in rest and digest mode, it's the opposite. So when you can control your stress response, you will better control your blood sugar reaction. All of these are related to how much your blood sugar spikes. So this doesn't mean get rid of stressors. It just means control how we respond to them. Do things like breath work. If you feel yourself getting amped up, that moment is not the time to take a bite. That moment is the time to take a walk, take a breath, do something to calm down before we eat. Okay. Oh, this was really interesting. The simple act of smiling. So this was a research study where they put not electrodes, but they put little, whatever those things are, on people's faces to monitor whether they were smiling or frowning. And they had some of them eat a meal in front of a tragedy movie and some of them eat a meal in front of a comedy movie. And they monitored their blood sugar increases and their insulin levels and compared it to the smiling versus the frowning and the crying and the hormone levels. And truly just the act of smiling while eating improved in a better blood sugar and insulin response while eating. So try and do things that make you happy while you have a meal. Sleep is very related to stress. You could say they're actually the same thing because if we're not sleeping well, our body is stressed, whether you feel stressed or not. Here are the recommendations on this chart here. So find your age. Find how many hours you're supposed to be sleeping, and is that what you're doing on a regular basis? I would say most of us not. Or if we are hitting that number, we're up a lot at night. We're tossing and turning. We're not hitting a deep quality sleep, which is also a piece of it. So this little box here at the top right was a UK study. It was thousands of people that they studied their sleep timing, their quality. This is all with things like the Apple Watch and the Oura Ring where we can actually capture this now. And what they showed across the board was poor sleep quality and late bedtime routines were significantly related to postprandial, means after eating, glucose level and poor glycemic control. So the less you slept and the less well you slept, the worse your glucose and your insulin levels the whole day that next day. The worse choices you made when you were eating and the more fat production you created. So I find this very, very interesting. And then the chart below is also that too much sleep can also be a problem, right? So you have this beautiful window of basically 7 to 9, 7 to 10 hours a night, and too much outside of that also increases our risk of diabetes. So sleep is critical. So if all that food stuff made you crazy, you're like, I hate vegetables. I don't even think I can eat 5 cups and I have an injury. There's no way I can make it to the gym. Can you focus on your sleep? There's always something we can pick that feels more tangible to help your blood sugar out, because any of these things will be an improvement. So can you set up your evening routine to where the lights go out or the lights are dimmed an hour before you go to sleep and it's nice and cool so you can bundle up and you don't have a TV or a phone or a tablet on in front of you for at least 30, if not 60 minutes before bed. Don't eat 2 hours before bed. All these things will help with that sleep. So your hot tips are to take 3 deep, slow breaths before and after every meal. Take those breaths from your belly, not from your chest. And what does that do? It calms us down. People think breath work is this woo-woo voodoo thing. And yet, whenever we go to the doctor and we're about to get a shot, what do? Take a deep breath. What do you do when someone's really, really stressed or worried about something? Okay, take a deep breath. Like, it's built in, and yet we think that breath work is funky. All you need is 3 deep, slow exhale breaths. Your brain will get the message, I'm okay now. I am in rest and digest mode. I am not in fight or flight. I am able to calmly eat this meal and utilize the sugars appropriately. And then if you have to have a nighttime snack, if you're just like, oh, I'm starving, I got to eat something, don't choose a carbohydrate right before bed and spike your blood sugar before sleeping. Instead, choose a fat or a protein. Have some olives. Have a small spoonful of peanut butter. Have literally a tablespoon of melted coconut oil straight. That'll get you. Those fats and proteins, they're not a craving stimulating food, so they don't make you want to reach for a whole lot more. And what they do is they just keep that blood sugar nice and balanced while you sleep. That little picture right there, avocados, olive oil, nuts, and sea salt is like one of my favorite snacks. So good and very little blood sugar response. Okay, so then the last thing that you could do if you wanted to take it even further is monitor your own blood sugars. And it's kind of interesting because I think sometimes this is where people land finally. Like, I've done all these other things, I'm ready to go further in my blood sugar journey. Sometimes you need to do this first. You need to be convinced by your own numbers that you need to try the other stuff. So I don't know. It depends on where you are, but monitoring your blood sugars is such a powerful, powerful tool so that you can see how you are responding to various types of carbohydrates and to lack of sleep and to stress and to movement. Everyone is different. Okay. Like I said, me and my husband, we have very similar lifestyles. We have different body types. We have different backgrounds. We have different jobs, and we're going to respond to the same meal differently. So what you can do, there's 3 different ways to do it. One, and we'll start from the right here, is symptom and a food tracker. You could just track your symptoms. If you don't want to purchase a device where you're tracking your blood sugar, you could just be writing down what you eat all day and monitor things like brain fog, fatigue, tingling, all those symptoms we kind of talked about at the beginning. Jot those down as you feel them throughout the day. They could just help you in determining what types of meals are possibly giving you a bit more of an insulin resistance response than others. It's not super accurate, but sometimes it's insightful if you've never paid attention to this before. Another thing you can do is get a glucose meter. You can buy these from CVS. You don't need a prescription. The meters themselves aren't very expensive. I think they're like $25 to $30. It's the strips that are expensive, but if you don't have diabetes and you're just doing this for an experiment, just buy 1 pack and kind of check it every once in a while. And what you do is you prick your finger, you put your blood on the little strip, and it tells you what your blood sugar is. And it's really great to do a morning fasted test. And I have my next slide shows you all of this broken down, and I will send you the slides. But your right when you wake up number is a really good indicator of what your baseline is. So you're right when you wake up, if it's 120, okay, we got some high blood sugars that we're working with. If you're between 70 and 85, probably great. So check it in the morning, check it pre and post meals at different times of the day. So maybe this week you're checking it pre and post breakfast. Next week you try it pre and post dinner. Check it before bed. You just have these different times of the day where you're checking it to get a picture of your body and see how it's responding to, again, lack of sleep, a stressful day, a higher carb meal, a lower carb meal. Or you can do what I love, but this is the pricier option, is the continuous glucose monitor. There's 2 different brands. There's the Freestyle Libre and there's Dexcom. And you can purchase them on your own without a prescription. They're just more expensive that way. I believe the Dexcom is like $250 or $275 for a 1 month for the device and 1 month worth of trackers. And then you have an app. So they're all around that cost. And there's various companies that do them. I'm not affiliated with any of them, but it's just fascinating because you plug it into your body and you look at your app and you can see in real time what's going on with your blood sugar all day, all night. So you can see, how often am I spiking to those high levels? How long am I staying at that high level? Okay, sure. Yeah, I ate pumpkin pie. Of course it's going to spike. How long did I stay up there? How insulin resistant am I to where it's not coming back down? If I decide to have pumpkin pie and then go for a walk for 20 minutes afterward, what happens then? You just experiment and you see how your body's responding and how you can make it better yourself with all of these different tips that I gave you. So these are the various numbers in that little box there of what you're aiming for. Someone with no diabetes diagnosis, in general, you want to be in that like 70 to 85 range baseline fasting, and you never really want to go above 140 in general ever. And when you do go up there, you want it to come back down again. So these are general guidelines. A1C is another good number to know how blood sugar, how well you're handling your blood sugars. You want yours to be as close to 5% as possible. And these are the different times that you should test, my ideas for different types of ways to test. So test the same carb at different times of day. So a lot of times we're more glucose sensitive in the morning and afternoon than we are in the evening. So if you had a piece of bread in the morning, you might have less of a spike than you do at night because our bodies respond to circadian rhythm. So as it starts to get darker, we start to shut down our metabolic system. We don't handle sugars as well. So a lot of people do better with higher carb meals, sort of breakfast, lunch. So with that, what are some things, like, just start right now, right this second. What could you do? Your next meal, maybe you haven't had lunch yet. Could you order a green salad to go with it? Or could you grab some cucumbers from the market, or if you have a cafeteria, and eat those first? Or if that's not an option, I already packed my lunch, I'm at work, wherever you are, I don't have anything, identify. Do that. What on your plate is carbohydrate, fat, protein? Are they all equal parts? Is it all carbohydrate? Just start getting used to recognizing those things. Can you also go for a walk after you eat your next meal? Those are 3 things I bet you can do right now, next time you eat, which hopefully for a lot of you is right now. Or maybe it's your next snack or your dinner. These are things you can do just right away that are really powerful. Truly, if you had a blood sugar monitor on, you would see changes. At the Wellness Center, we have dietitians that can help. We have personal training. We have restorative sessions if the stress piece is difficult for you. If you are someone who is very interested in that continuous glucose monitor concept and you want guidance, we do have an online module that is $15. And you just go online on our website and buy it, and then you have access. It's kind of like a mini college course. You just go through the modules, you learn about it, you have access to it forever, but you do have to have a glucose monitor for it to make sense. It like guides you through a 30-day plan of glucose monitoring. So we have that option too, just things that are at your disposal. So that's our information. Let me pull up the chat. Okay. So feel free to put questions in the chat here. Can low thyroid hypo or high cholesterol be a factor? I'm guessing, Nancy, that you mean, is that a factor in blood sugar control, like how your body responds to glucose? And yes, if that's indeed your question, the answer is yes. Okay. If you have hypo or hyperthyroid, that does impact how your metabolism functions. And your metabolism is essentially how healthy your mitochondria are, more or less, how much they're working. So if it's hypo, meaning it's a slow thyroid, you're typically going to see a lot more insulin resistance. If you're hyper, not so much. So yes, that can definitely be a factor. If you have like family hypercholesterolemia, maybe you might, because you do usually see more LDL cells in the blood. So that whole idea of that little rod, that stick where the glitters fall down and move around, you're going to have more of those in the form of cholesterol cells. So theoretically, it could also impact your insulin resistance. We do see that metabolic conditions like cholesterol and hypertension and blood sugar issues, they all tend to give each other more risks for the other one. But it's not like with thyroid, that's a direct correlation. Thyroid will absolutely impact blood sugar versus cholesterol. They're all just kind of correlated in one big bucket. One's not causing the other. Hopefully that makes sense. I've heard that order of eating impacts glucose. Is that just the fiber first, or is there more to that? That's exactly it. Yes, it does matter. Now, everyone is different and as far as how much that matters, but absolutely having fiber first, that's the key, will slow down the absorption of your carbohydrates. You should also have a little bit of the fat and the protein first, so that's all kind of on board as you eat your carbohydrates, but it's really more the fiber first that is specifically the key. Also, how quickly after, if you're going to have dessert or a sweet, you probably want to have that within 30 minutes of finishing the meal so that you have all that fiber and protein and fat from the meal already in there, and not wait, 3 hours till you have dessert when you're suddenly have an empty GI tract again. You're welcome. How is cycling as an exercise, cardio, strength training, or combo? It's a bit of a combo, but more leaning in cardio. So you do get some muscle resistance, especially, I mean, if you're a cyclist, you know how that feels in your thighs and your quads when you're standing up. But especially if you're not standing or if you're doing a lot of sprint work, it's much more cardio. You're not building a whole lot of muscle there. It's not really considered resistance training. It's much more combo than, let's say, just like going for a walk or a run, but we do consider that more cardio. When you're on the go, can you drink green juice before each meal to have that as a cushion? So most juices are still going to increase your blood sugar, even if it is a green juice, because you're essentially breaking down any fiber that was in that produce into its tinier cells, which even with vegetables does include some glucose. So if you're going to have green juice, I'd actually rather you eat that drink it as your carbohydrate. Have some almonds first. So partner it, think of it as a carbohydrate, partner it with some almonds, some fat and protein, have the almonds first, since that has some fiber in it, then drink the green juice. Don't drink the green juice first because it doesn't count as fiber. Even if it is all vegetables and maybe just a little apple, which is great for antioxidants, you're getting tons of vitamins there. It's not creating a fiber mesh. How can I learn more about the CGM course you mentioned? Go to stjudewellnesscenter.org right there on your screen. Click in the programs and events tab. And it's over there on the left. We have several different programs and it's called Optimal Blood Sugar, Optimal Health. That's the module and you can click that and it'll tell you all about it. I made it, so I'm proud of it. But what it does is it gives you a lot of mini courses and then it gives you a 20-day plan of how to be eating and testing and eating and testing. And the whole point is to learn your own blood sugars. It's not to create blood sugar stability. It's not to lose weight. It's to eat this thing, test it this way. Tomorrow, eat the same thing and test it this way. And so that you can start learning your own responses. That is the purpose of the program. If I walk quickly or speed walk for 30 minutes or more, 2 to 3 times per week, is that good cardio? That is good, I would say, functional cardio. And what we mean by functional cardio is that's what your body's supposed to do. So that's not putting any sort of stress on your body at all. I mean, I guess it depends on how fast you mean by speed walk. If you're speed walking so fast that you're out of breath, that's fantastic. If you're just kind of walking fairly quickly, but you could keep up a conversation, that's wonderful. And you should do that every single day if you can, but that's not a stressor. It's not a cardiovascular exercise per se. That's our body's functional movement, which is, yes, what we're supposed to do. I wouldn't call that like your high intensity cardio or resistance training, but that's your daily movement for sure. Does fiber survive a smoothie? Nope. It doesn't. Some, like a little bit, but you break down a whole lot of the fiber. Now, that doesn't mean a smoothie is bad at all. There can be wonderful, especially if you're using lots of protein in there and some fats in there. But honestly, my favorite way to eat is to drink a smoothie is to put some toppings on top. So some unsweetened coconut flakes and some crunched up walnuts or pecans and eat the top of it with a spoon and then finish drinking it. And that's just enough fiber to help out with all the fibers you broke down in that smoothie. Or have a smoothie like with a meal, something like that. Can you re-explain the 2 lines of sugar content, sugar versus added sugar? Oh, yeah. So, can I go backwards? Aha. So all labels will show total carbohydrates in bold. Of that, what is sugar? And of that sugar, how much is added sugar? It won't all equal the same because it's not including fibers and just other types of starch that is included in carbohydrates. So they won't always equal each other. They should be pretty close. But essentially, let's see, if it says there's total sugars is 21, total carbs is 30, that means there's 9 grams unaccounted for. So there's 9 grams of like basically lactose in the yogurt because there's no fiber. So it's the natural sugar. And then the added sugar is what's not natural that's also being added in. So if there was no honey added to this, let's say, then there would just be 21 minus 16 would be the total grams of lactose that you're always going to find in a milk product. So it's all sugars together is natural and added, and then the added is its own separate thing. Hopefully that made sense. Mount SAC employees have access to the St. Jude Wellness Center. Your employee benefit are these programs, and yes, you can come here, but that is out of pocket. Trying to get, there we go. Is substituting olive oil for green olives as a dressing good? Olive oil for green olives. I don't know why that would. I'm not sure what that substitute would be. So a dressing is the oil, right? Or do you just mean getting rid of the oil and just putting olives on and eating it dry? Either way, they're both good options for a fat. The actual olive itself has more fiber, so I always prefer a whole food fat, but it's kind of hard to eat a salad dry. What is your go-to when you have a spike, both food and exercise? Great question. When I'm having a spike, the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move my body. That's going to give me the fastest, most effective drop in that blood sugar without going too low either. So I might go for a 15-minute walk. If I'm home, I have like my spin bike. I might do literally just a 7 to 10-minute fast ride because I also don't want to go so fast and go into sprint mode that I'm dropping my blood sugar back down. If I'm spiking, as far as food goes, it's hard. It's kind of hard to control it once it's already spiking, to be totally honest. So the best thing is movement. But then what I would probably do is try and have my next snack or meal be very heavy in fat and protein and maybe minimal carb at all, unless it's like raw vegetables, so that I kind of rebalance, recalibrate myself out that way. I'm assuming I'm wearing a glucose monitor. I'm probably going to monitor it and not eat again until it has balanced out. Even if I feel hungry, I might just stick to the waters. Oh, water. That would be another one. Make sure I'm hydrated. How is plain yogurt mixed with chia seed, flaxseed, and berries overnight as a beneficial? Beautiful. Plain yogurt with berries, flaxseed, chia seed. Love it. You're getting yogurt is your protein with a little bit of carbohydrate. You're getting fat and protein and fiber from the chia and the flaxseed, and you're getting berries as more carbohydrate. So that's a super balanced meal or snack. I don't know that I would add anything to that at all. Maybe some nuts on top if you wanted a little bit more protein and fiber. It's great. Am I able to access old recorded videos? Yes, ma'am. They are on, if you're from Mount SAC, they're on Mount SAC Wellness website. You can also check them out much later on our Wellness Center website under the video tab. All right, I think I made it. You're welcome. We have one more webinar for the year, and then we're out of here. We're out of 2024. So next month we are talking about food, mood, and mindfulness. So really leaning heavily on that idea of the stress while we eat and how to handle that, because we're in the season of abundance and eating and stress and joy, and that can be a hard one to do. So that's next month's December topic. That's on our Wellness Center page under programs and events. And that's kind of it for the rest of the year. We'll start back up with 2025 stuff. So you're so welcome. You're welcome. Real quick answer, bananas, they are a fruit. You don't need to avoid them, but you do need to partner them with protein or fat. So, all right, everyone, have an excellent rest of your day and week, and happy Thanksgiving ahead. And I'll see you after that. Have a good one.